Nerdrotic.com.
Greetings, you over 1 million practitioners of common sense and the 40% who haven't subscribed yet. According to Elle magazine, women are taking charge in this week's Rings of Power episode. And they're not wrong. That's why everything is falling apart in Middle-earth and in Amazon. There are so many individual stories in this week's episode, it's hard to believe that there's only 2 more weeks left. Thank God there's only 2 more weeks left. Now, by stories, if you mean boring series of events to get to the latest thing from Peter Jackson they can pilfer, sure. One thing we do know is the show sucks. Is the 4 storylines, which will intertwine eventually, all share the same thing. Listen to women.
Down with the patriarchy.
From Numenor's former queen to strong-willed Disa to the 2 Harfoots, this episode of Rings of Power had women figuring things out and taking charge. Far be it for me to point out that it was a woman, Galadriel, who knew who Sauron was and didn't bother to tell anybody. And far be it for me to point out that this entire season has been directed by women, including the last 2 episodes, which were directed by 2 women. But dear viewer, I want you to keep that article in mind as we go over episode 6 of the Rings of Power season 2, because the absolute buggery of the professor's seminal work continues. Previously on the Rings of Power.
The Harfoots, where are they?
Well, there's what you're searching for, and there's what you find now, isn't it?
Might you teach me how to wield a staff?
Clean your hands, wash your face, and come join me by the fire.
Not every battle must be fought to be won.
Give me your hand.
I don't care.
How much do you really know about this, Arnatar?
The orcs are not in Mordor. A legion of them are headed for Eregion. Galadriel was right.
But I've been watching you all evening, and I want to tear you apart.
And this episode opens up with the man, Don Lemonless, who commits a hate crime against 3 innocent orc fathers. These poor Uruk folks were raping, pillaging, and torturing hard to provide for their families, and they were taken out by this monster, who clearly hasn't been to the Sylvan barbershop for a while. And this unwarranted slaying of innocent, corrupted forms of life was all over a map, and then he fucks off not to be seen for the rest of the episode. But to be fair to Don Lemonless, Amazon is marginalizing his character this season. And then we're back to Eregion, where the multicultural Gen Z, mostly female Smiths of Eregion call a staff meeting and call Grandma Brimbor to task for creating a hostile work environment. I guess creating the Rings of Power out of order and being the dumbest character in this show is taking its toll. And acting as a surrogate for the audience, Grandma Brimbor forgets his Amazon original character assistant's name.
What is your name again, Smith?
You mean you don't remember?
Motherfucker, what makes you think I care?
Then Sauron shows up and tells Modernity and the rest of the multicultural Gen Z Elven Smiths of Eregion they're getting pink slips. And he does this to allow his husband, Grandma Brimbor, to complete the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in. And apparently it wasn't only messages that weren't making it to Eregion from Linden, it was messages from Eregion. And when one of those messengers finally turns up with a message carved on him that translates to "where is he?" do they do anything about it? They go, nah, it'll be fine. And the scene ends with Sauron walking the battlements of Eregion and noticing orc campfires that apparently all the lookouts and scouts missed. And as just a basic story, the only way any of this can work is everyone is retarded. Speaking of that, let's get to Galadriel and Adar, where she thinks as her prisoner, they're about to discuss an alliance. That's right, an alliance between Galadriel and orcs. Now, I could break down canonically why this portrays every facet of her character, but this is the show that wants her to jump Sauron's Barad-dûr, #Galadriel. Now, in this instance of women taking charge, Galadriel not only confirms that Halbrand is Sauron to Adar, she tells him about the elven ring Nenya and follows that up by telling Adar she gave it to Elrond.
Stupid!
Now, canonically, none of this happened, but if you set out to make the worst adaptation of all time, this would be it. My favorite part is when Adar is telling Galadriel the story of how he and a half a dozen orcs Caesared Sauron, and he brings out his crown, which apparently used to belong to Morgoth. Now, they mentioned they downsized it, but there's a little problem here. Morgoth used to be between 25 and 30 feet tall. And in the real story, when Morgoth fell at the end of the First Age, the Valar made his crown into a collar. Meanwhile, over at the Númenórean and the Restless, or as As Middle-earth Turns, or This Is the Second Age of Our Lives. Shout out to Nerd Cookies for that one. After Elendil is betrayed by his Amazon original creation daughter, whose name I can't be bothered to remember.
What is your name again, Smith?
He refuses to bend the knee to Ar-Pharazôn and is sentenced to trial by Abyss. And after crying with his daughter, he cries with Miriel, and then they touch foreheads. And even after Miriel tells him to bend the knee, Elendil says no, because he's gonna leave his fate to the gods, and then he says something I've been waiting for all season.
The sea is always right.
The sea is always right!
The sea is always right!
And the sea is always right.
What the fuck are you talking about, man?
And within a show that's completely jacked up the story of Numenor, partially by taking the race swap Muriel and making her far more prominent than she ever was so she wouldn't be robbed of her agency. Because canonically, against her will and against all laws of Numenor, Ar-Pharazôn forced his first cousin, Miriel, and yes, they're cousins, into marriage, and that's how he usurped the throne. Anyway, in a story where they didn't want to rob Miriel of her agency, she literally robs Elendil of his by taking his place at the trial of the Abyss, and after the black woman is spit out by the white worm, all of a sudden the window-licking Numenorians like her again. So let me get this straight. Within this show, to gain power in Numenor, you either have to have an eagle land next to you or be spit out by a white worm. Did I get that right? So Tolkienian. This brings us to the Harfoots and the the Stewars, another group of characters that has been thankfully marginalized this season by Amazon. And after setting all that up, this scene is too boring and inconsequential to talk about, except for the fact that Buckwheat made out with female Sam. Now, in the past, I've made some pretty harsh accusations about what Hollywood does to some of our sacred stories, some of our lore, some of our American mythology. For example, I accuse the Acolyte of taking George Lucas's lore to Harvey Weinstein's office. Well, The Rings of Power takes Tolkien's to Epstein Island, concerning Dangalf and now Maya Master Tom Bombadil instead of the Tom Bombadil from the books, who's a merry fellow, a guardian of the forest with a smoking hot wife. Now he's Dangalf's sensei, who's going to teach him how to wield the secret fire.
The secret fire whispers to us. If we have ears to hear, it tells us things, even shows us things.
Does it show us things that will be, or things that only might be?
It shows tomorrow's clouds as clear as yesterday's sunshine.
That's not how the secret fire works.
The secret fire, or the flame of Arnor, is not the force. It's essentially the power of light. It could possibly be interpreted as the Holy Spirit, which absolutely confirms that Dangalf is Gandalf. And let's just keep in mind, we're 6 episodes in to season 2, and they're still mystery boxing Gandalf's name.
Those big folk were only after us to get to him, the stranger.
And everything that's happened to Dangalf this season has led to him having to pick his staff.
The Dark Wizard found his staff, and now the time has come for you to find yours. You'll find your true staff only when the vision of your heart is single to the service of the secret fire.
And I see what they're doing here. By the time Dangalf gets a name, a staff, and his pointy hat, it'll be the Third Age.
But wait! There's more!
It's time to repurpose a line from the books and Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings.
Somehow I know, unless I find her soon, she will die. Both of them will die.
Many that die deserve life. Some that live deserve death. Who are you to give it to them?
Now, some people might think in isolation, which it isn't, that repurposing this line from the books and the movie is harmless. I strongly disagree. Not only because it's abject hackery, because of the context. Because, as most of you know from the books and the film, that's Gandalf's response to Frodo wishing Bilbo had killed Gollum. Essentially wishing death on something that might seem irredeemable, but might not be.
It's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance.
Pity? It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. Many that live deserve death. Some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them, Frodo?
In The Rings of Power, it was Tom Bombadil responding to Dangalf wanting his friends to live, which makes old Tom Bombadil a dick, and the writers complete morons. Meanwhile, over at Khazad-dûm, Sauron took the Middle-earth high-speed train to re-up on some of that mithril. And he says the word.
Or perhaps Khazad-dûm would prefer something more precious.
Now Durin III says no because he thinks he can get a better deal out of Sauron. And after Sauron says fine, he looks at a torch and sees a Balrog to remind the audience that it's under Moria. Never mind the fact that if Sauron knew Durin's Bane was down there, the first thing he would have done is tried to recruit him. Canonically, he doesn't wake up for thousands of years, but in this show, it'll probably mean next season. Anyway, after Durin IV notices that his ring is affecting Durin III like the One Ring, which it shouldn't, he asks him to take it off and we get another repurposed line.
Take off the ring.
I will not is mine. Belongs to me.
It's mine.
And apparently now the dwarven rings give them superpowers.
That's not how the rings work.
But we did get some interesting information this episode. We find out that the first black female dwarf, Disa, who wasn't really the first black female dwarf, was abandoned by her father.
I love him as much as you do. Only knows he's twice the father to me my own ever was.
That's racist!
Now, Disa Nuts and Dúin IV have decided that the dwarves are delving too greedily and too deep. And because women are taking charge this episode, it's Disa Nuts who's gonna stop them. How, you ask? Like this.
He's gonna blow!
And I have to admit, this is a little on the nose for Amazon, even as I record this on Batman Day, because she becomes Bat Disa, the Dark Dwarf, and Tolkien's mighty dwarves, who were created by Elle to be strong, resistant to fire, and the evils of Morgoth, who were hardier than any other race, run like bitches from bats. Speaking of women taking charge, back to Guy Ladriel, who was just tricked by Adar into believing there was going to be some sort of alliance with orcs, and then she gave up all the information he needed. Now the room temperature IQ Guy Ladriel is warning Adar that he's falling into a trap and giving Sauron everything he needs, which she would know.
This is all his design. This is what Sauron wants.
For she is more fair than all the jewels beneath the earth.
Now, I totally agree with Elle Magazine that this is an episode with a theme of men needing to listen to women, but why in the hell should they in this case? Because Guy Ladriel is the woman solely responsible for all of this. And in the final scene, Sauron is able to conjure a spell to convince Grandma Brimbor to hurry up and finish those 9 rings for men to put their fingers in. Sauron makes it look like it's a nice peaceful day in Eregion, when in truth, it's actually night and elves are running for their lives. Now, I'm guessing this power would have come in handy in over a dozen different scenes throughout these 1.5 seasons, including when he got Caesared by a half a dozen orcs. But that's not important right now. He gives Grandma Brimbor some mithril and he's off to work. And it looks like Grandma Brimbor will be making the 9 rings for men to put their fingers in during the sack of Eregion. But shout out to the elven lookouts of Eregion for finally showing up to work and noticing the giant legions of orcs with trebuchets shooting fireballs at their city.
That escalated quickly.
Far be it from me to point out that it was Sauron who led the host out of Mordor and invaded Eriador. And this took a long time because the elves held their own for a little while, including an alliance between Elrond and this guy named Celeborn, whose name shows up in the appendices, but of course Guy Ladriel's gonna take his place, so she'll have her agency. And the sack of Eregion preceded Sauron getting the Rings of Power. And the Rings of Power didn't affect the bearer until Sauron made the One Ring. And at this point, I feel bad for Sauron. He put in all this work over 500 years, and all he had to do was tell a couple of elves they look pretty, or one that he has a nice gown. He told one chick he was a king and she just believed him. He's probably kicking himself. And yes, I'm Team Sauron now. Not that I like the character, I just couldn't care less if anyone else lives or dies. And quite frankly, it doesn't take much to become the ruler of simple Earth. But even if you're watching this show as a total normie and you remove all the Tolkien lore, which this show has, soulless characters, hollow storytelling, and even if you're here for the spectacle, well, none of that has happened yet. But let's give it up to all the women on the screen and behind the scenes that took charge and lost 60% of the audience from season 1, took the living embodiment of evil Sauron and turned him into a thirst trap, and took the best female character in Tolkien, Galadriel, and made her a dumb dude.
Nerdrotic.com.
If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this long. I will see you in the next video.
Cast it into the fire!
Destroy it!